Okay, so we'll begin. So today is, wow, August 1st. How time flies so quickly. And we'll begin with the verse of Homage to the Buddha. And I have to, sorry, but I'm going to have to mute everybody except myself. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa Bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa Bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And now we are going to return to the Anguttara Nikaya, and within the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Fours, the suttas, which are framed around 4 items. And we now come to the sutta number 61, which is called in Pali the Pattakamma Sutta, which I translate as worthy deeds. And this is a discourse that the Buddha gave to his disciple, the lay disciple, named Anathapindika, who was the foremost of the, we call him the patron of the Buddha and the Sangha, that he was the male lay disciple who most amply and most generously looked after the needs of the Buddha and the monastics. And of course, he's most famous in that he donated to the Buddha the land in the city of Shravasti, which has originally belonged to Prince Jeta, and which was purchased by Anathapindika and donated to the Sangha for the purpose of establishing a monastery. And so that monastery is always called Anathapindika Arama, the monastery of Anathapindika. And the word Anathapindika is actually not the proper name, but it's really a kind of honorific title by which this householder is known. His actual name was Sudatta, but everybody called him Anathapindika, and this has the meaning of the word anatta means one who is helpless, one who is without any protector. And it refers to widows and orphans. And pinda is a gift, originally a gift of food, but it takes on a more general meaning. So Anathapindika was so called because he was the one who provided many, say, protective measures or beneficial, it did engage in many beneficial activities on behalf of the people considered helpless, without protectors within the society. So he probably established homes for orphans, homes for old people who didn't have children to look after them. And so he was a great benefactor, a great philanthropist of his time. And when he encountered the Buddha, then he became a disciple of the Buddha and constantly looked after the needs of the Buddha and the other monastics. Okay, so in this sutta, the householder Anathapindika approaches the Buddha, and without any, he doesn't ask any questions here, but the Buddha spontaneously gives him a discourse. And this is a very important discourse in providing a kind of framework for lay Buddhist practice within the countries of Southern Asia that follow the Theravada Buddhist tradition. And so the Buddha begins by saying that there are 4 things that are wished for, desired, agreeable, but rarely gained in the world. So what are these four things? So the first is wealth. And so a layperson will often have the thought, the wish, may wealth come to me. But the Buddha doesn't just stop for a properly disciplined layperson, not just the desire for wealth, but the wealth should come righteously. I think in the Pali is dhammena. Yeah, in Pali it's saha dhammena, along with the Dhamma, in accordance with the Dhamma. And so it's interesting. Well, I'll bring this point up as we go on. Okay, so the first thing is wealth, and then having gained wealth righteously, then the next thing that the layperson will desire, will wish for, is fame. Fame for himself and fame for relatives and preceptors, which doesn't necessarily mean, in the context of ancient Indian society, it doesn't mean that you are getting your name broadcast on newspapers and across the internet, or that there are marquees which are announcing your name, like for sporting events or musical performances or motion or cinema movies, but having a good reputation so that other people speak well of you and people look upon you with respect and esteem and speak your praise. Okay, so that is the second thing that the layperson wishes of, actually not only lay people, but monastics also. And it's rarely gained in the world. Okay, then having gained, and then one wants it not only for oneself, but also one wants one's relatives and one's preceptors or teachers also to have a good reputation. Okay, then having gained wealth righteously, having gained fame for oneself, one's relatives and preceptors, then the next thing one wants is a long lifespan. So one wishes, may I live long and enjoy a long lifespan. And now we might take this for granted, or at least until recently, we would take this for granted here in our modern age. But in ancient India, so many people would die even if they survived infancy. So many kids would have died in their infancy. And with communicable diseases, people would have died in their teenage years. Young adults would have died. So maybe the average lifespan, even for those who survived infancy at that time, could have been 40, 50 years old. And so it would be quite legitimate to wish for oneself to have a long lifespan. Even the Buddha lived only to be 80 years old. When we can consider today, so many people are living into their late 80s, 90s. And even the Buddha's texts speak about Brahmins or elderly monks who are reputed to have lived to the age of 120. So it's a bit puzzling that the Buddha passed away only at the age of 80. But anyway, even to live to the age of 80 against the backdrop of that time would have been considered a long lifespan. So that is the third worldly wish that a householder might entertain. Then the fourth wish is having gained wealth righteously, having gained fame for oneself and one's relatives, having enjoyed a long lifespan. The next thing one wishes is a good rebirth. So to be reborn in a good destination, and at minimum, that would be to be reborn as a human being under auspicious conditions, where one has rebirth, being reborn into a fairly affluent family under peaceful conditions, and to have the opportunity for a good education, and especially for a Buddhist practitioner to encounter the Buddha Dharma and to be able to practice, to meet with good spiritual teachers and to be able to practice the Dharma in a proper way. But beyond the human rebirth would be a rebirth in one of the heavenly worlds. So these are the four typical things that a person living in the world wishes for, things that are hard to obtain: wealth, fame, a long life. So those are three benefits or goods that pertain to this life here and now, and then a good future rebirth, a good destiny, including rebirth in the heavenly world. And what I find interesting that the Buddha doesn't reject the desire for these things for a layperson, or even in the case of many monks, he would say that these are good aspirations. So he doesn't say to the layperson, don't think about gaining wealth, you should be content living in poverty, but rather he'll teach the layperson how to acquire wealth righteously. And he doesn't say you should be completely indifferent to your reputation, but it's natural to wish for a good reputation. And so this can be you could say, a righteous wish, provided that one wants to obtain that fame in accordance with righteous principles. And to achieve one's aspirations in life, it's important to have a fairly long lifespan. And so he says it's quite legitimate to aspire for long life. And he doesn't say to the layperson, or even to many of the monks, don't think about getting a good rebirth, but just put forth all of your effort, all of your energy to attain nirvana in this life itself. The Buddha, because he's able to see the potentials of living beings, would have realized that very, very few people had the potential to achieve arhatship, liberation, in this life itself. And so if one is not going to achieve the final goal in this life itself, then it's natural to aspire for, to wish for a happy rebirth, a favorable rebirth in which one can continue one's practice and one's quest for liberation. Okay, so those are four ideals, four goals, four objects of aspiration that the householder or even a monastic person might cherish. And these four things, though they're desired so strongly, but they're rarely gained in the world. And why is it so difficult to obtain these four things? Because people don't know the proper way to achieve them. All of these things, or we could say, are the fruits of courses of karma, courses of action, courses of conduct, of behavior. And so if one is going to achieve these things, one has to know what is the appropriate course of action that leads to these things. And so continuing the discourse, the Buddha says that there are four other things that lead to obtaining those four ideals, those four objectives. So what are these four things? They are accomplishment in faith, the Pali word here is saddha, in virtuous behavior, good behavior. This is sila, accomplishment in generosity, or chaga, which is expressed or manifest in acts of giving, or dana. For the attitude itself, the mental orientation, is generosity, which is represented by the Pali word chaga. And then the fourth means for obtaining those goals is accomplishment in wisdom. And of course, this is panya. So that is what is stated in this sutta. But I have a somewhat different, slightly different take on this based on some other suttas. And I'm thinking particularly of the sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 135. It's the Chula Kama Vibhanga Sutta, the shorter discourse on the analysis of karma, in which the Buddha explains to a young Brahmin named Subha the different types of karmas, different types of action that lead to different desirable and undesirable results. Yeah, in that sutta, see if I can find it. Yeah, the Chula Kama Vibhanga Sutta. Here, this young Brahmin comes to the Buddha and says, what is the reason, what is the cause why we see differences amongst human beings? Some have long life, some short life, some are often ill, others enjoy good health, some are ugly, some are beautiful, some are powerful or influential, some are powerless, some are poor, some are wealthy, and so on. And then the Buddha explains some of the karmas, or types of action that lead to these results. And here, in the case of wealth, what leads to the acquisition of wealth is being generous, practicing generosity. And so he says that some woman or man is one who practices giving and who gives generously to support ascetics and Brahmins, offering them food, drink, clothing, vehicles, garlands, dwelling places, lamps, and so on. And so it's through that karma that one might be reborn in the heavenly world. And then with the breakup of the body after death, if one is not born in the heavenly world, then one comes back to the human realm. And as one is born into a family with great wealth. And so in that case, the specific cause for great wealth is the practice of generosity. And then the cause for fame is speaking praise of those who are worthy of praise. And so if you speak criticism and denigration and slander those who are worthy of praise, that will be the cause for dishonor, for getting a bad reputation. But if you speak praise of those who are worthy of praise, then that becomes the karmic cause for gaining fame for oneself in future lives. And for long life, the specific cause, the karmic cause for a long lifespan is abstaining from the destruction of life, and probably would say for protecting life, for helping to extend the lives of others. That will become a strong karmic cause for enjoying a long lifespan oneself. And then for rebirth in a good destination, while actually observing the 5 precepts, the 10 courses of wholesome action, all of those will conduce to a good destination. Okay, but this sutta speaks about 4 different qualities, partly overlapping. And so we have these 4 things that lead to wealth, fame, long life, and a happy rebirth. So the first is faith. And the Pali word I translate as faith, of course, is the word saddha. So we have the expression accomplishment in faith is saddha sampada. Let me get a file. Do you see the file that I just created?
Yes, Monday.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so it's saddha sampada. So sampada can mean accomplishment, achievement, possession of. So we could say accomplishment in faith, possession of faith. And so how does one have this accomplishment in faith? So that is what the sutta spells out next.
Ante, may I ask a question?
You could ask the question. I'm not sure I'll answer it now, but ask the question.
Could you you were reading about rebirth?
Yeah.
And could you just go, I was writing it down, I couldn't get it down fast enough. Could you go over the one about rebirth, what kind of person gets a good rebirth? You talked about long life. And
Oh, okay. What I said is that it could be observing the 5 precepts and observing the 10 ways of wholesome action. And you'll find this explained in detail in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Book of Tens, around Sutta, let's say Sutta, maybe it's 176, 177.
Thank you, Bhante.
And Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 41 is very clear about that.
Thank you.
Okay, so accomplishment in faith. So this is here the Buddha is explaining that the disciple is endowed with faith. Okay, that's tautological. But the key point, one has faith in the enlightenment of the Tathagata. That is one. It's not simply a blind faith in the Buddha, a devotional-based faith, but one has faith in the enlightenment of the Buddha. The sutta tells us in Tathagatasa Bodhi. So the faith is faith in Tathagata, of course, is another name for the Buddha, and Bodhi means the enlightenment of the Buddha. And the way one sort of manifests that faith is that one accepts that the Buddha is an arahat, one who has completely destroyed the defilements, who is perfectly enlightened, who has fully comprehended the nature of phenomena, accomplished in clear knowledge and possessing flawless or excellent conduct. Sugato, the one who has gone well, gone to the good destination, the one, the knower of the world, the one who understands all the different realms of existence and the different types of beings in all the different realms of existence, who knows their innermost mental dispositions, inclinations, tendencies. And therefore he is the supreme trainer of persons to be tamed, the teacher not only of human beings, but of the devas, the deities, the enlightened one, and Bhagava, the blessed one. So when one has that trust, that confidence, that faith, the Buddha is one who is endowed with these excellent qualities. That is the accomplishment in faith. And generally, this accomplishment in faith, of course, we start off as a worldling or a putujana, a common person, with this belief or conviction in the excellent qualities of the Buddha. But it's when one achieves the stage of stream entry, the first breakthrough to realization of the Dhamma, then that faith becomes unshakable. It becomes a faith that is grounded in realization, in experience. Okay, so this is accomplishment in faith. Then accomplishment in virtuous behavior, that is possessing sila. In sila, the original sense of sila is not precept. Nowadays they use the word panchasila to mean the 5 precepts, but sila is the type of behavior that is governed by the precepts, or that is established by the precepts. The original word for precept is sikapada, which means literally a step or factor of training. And it's when one observes, undertakes the precepts, and observes them, that one acquires sila. And sila is then we could call it the trait of character, the inner disposition towards virtuous behavior, or the virtuous behavior itself. And that virtuous behavior and the disposition is established by undertaking the sikapada, the rules or precepts of training. And so what is this virtuous behavior? So here the disciple is said to be one who, well, this is abbreviated, but abstains from the destruction of life, abstains from stealing, abstains from sexual misconduct, adultery, seduction of minors, intercourse with those who are protected in some way, then abstaining from deliberate false speech or lying, and abstaining from the use of liquor and intoxicants. So this is virtuous behavior. And then the third virtue is accomplishment in generosity. And the Pali word here is chaga, and Sanskrit is tyaga, which has the sense, it actually has 2 senses, both in Pali and in Sanskrit. One sense is that usually in relation to lay people, the sense is generosity, which we're going to explain. And the other sense in relation to ascetics or renunciants is renunciation, the act of renunciation. So whether it's renunciation or generosity, the common feature of both is giving up, giving up. So when one practices generosity, one gives up or gives away one's own wealth or possessions to benefit others. And if one is embarking on the ascetic life, then one gives up, renounces one's possessions, one's material security, in order to devote one's efforts to spiritual practice, especially meditative practice. But here the Buddha is explaining chaga in a way that corresponds to generosity. So here the disciple dwells at home, so it's indicating a householder, with a mind free from the stain of miserliness. So miserliness, this is the opposite of generosity. So chaga is opposed to chera or macharya. So miserliness means that one grasps one's possessions, clings to them, and doesn't want to part from them. One holds to them tightly, thinking, this is mine. And one has this sort of anxious sense that one's identity and security depends on one's accumulated wealth and possessions. And so when one wants to break through that miserliness, to break it up, the way to do that is by practicing giving to others. And initially that might be difficult because there's this natural tendency for the mind to cling to its possessions. But one starts off with small gifts, small acts of relinquishment to others. And when one practices those little acts of giving, one sees that the act of giving is accompanied by a feeling of happiness and joy and freedom. One is freeing oneself from dependence on those objects of clinging. And then as one begins to take delight in these little acts of generosity, then one is able to give more and more abundantly, more and more generously, until one becomes freely generous, open-handed, delighting in relinquishment, devoted to charity, delighting in giving and sharing. So that is the full accomplishment in generosity, where one has wiped away that stain of miserliness, and is able to give to others with a mind full of delight and happiness. Okay, then the fourth virtue or excellent quality that's to be accomplished, and that is accomplishment in wisdom. And of course, the word here is panya. And usually when the Buddha is speaking in a monastic context, he speaks about panya as being the insight into anicca, dukkha, anatta, the insight into impermanence, into the unsatisfactory nature of things, into the selfless nature of things. But here the Buddha explains wisdom in a somewhat different way, as understanding the danger in the 5 hindrances and giving up or abandoning the 5 hindrances. So first comes the understanding of the danger in the hindrances. So he says, when one dwells with a heart overcome by longing and unrighteous greed, one does what should be avoided and neglects one's duty, and in that case, one's fame and happiness are spoiled. And similarly, when one dwells with the heart overcome by ill will, dullness and drowsiness, sometimes translated, what's the other translation? Indolence and sloth and torpor. Then the fourth is restlessness and remorse, and the fifth is doubt. Now, usually when we have the standard list of the 5 hindrances, the first hindrance is given as kamachanda, sensual desire. And that is the first hindrance in the case of a monastic person, because the obligation for the monastic is to overcome sensual desire, particularly sexual desire. But here the Buddha is speaking to Anathapindika, who's a layperson. And so he doesn't expect Anathapindika to completely give up sensual desire. So instead, he frames the first hindrance as being longing and unrighteous greed. And the word that I translate as longing is abhijja, which is also sometimes translated as covetousness. That is, covetousness is clinging to one's possessions. So cling to longing and unrighteous greed. The Pali is visama. Visama lobha, unrighteous greed. So the Buddha expects that in the case of a householder like Anathapindika, there'll be some lobha, some greed, but what one has to avoid is unrighteous greed, the greed that might motivate you to, in a kind of illicit way, try to acquire the possessions of others, or if one is a businessman like Anathapindika, to drive competitors out of business, particularly by resorting to unrighteous means. And so the ideal for the householder is to be content with a relatively simple way of life, not to be constantly longing for more and more wealth, more and more possessions, let's say inordinate wealth and excessive possessions, to be desiring to live a life of self-indulgence and luxury. But in the case of the other hindrances, they are explained or enumerated exactly as in the case of the monastic: ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. And so now continuing, the Buddha says that when a noble disciple has understood that longing and unrighteous greed are a defilement of the mind, then he abandons them. Similarly, in the case of ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse and doubt, when one sees that this is a defilement of the mind, then one abandons them. Okay, so this is just, we could say it's a preliminary stage for developing true liberating wisdom. So the abandoning of the 5 hindrances is not really the achievement of the kind of wisdom, the ultimate wisdom of the Buddha's teaching, but it's an important stage in acquiring that wisdom. And so the Buddha continues that when the noble disciple has understood that longing and unrighteous greed are a defilement of the mind and has abandoned them, and so for ill will and all of the others up to doubt, when he's abandoned these 5 hindrances, then he's called a noble disciple of great wisdom, of wide wisdom, one who sees the range, one who is accomplished in wisdom. Okay, so those are the 4 things that lead to obtaining the 4 things in the world that are wished for and desired for obtaining wealth, obtaining fame, long lifespan, and a happy rebirth. Okay, now the Buddha is going to go back to the first of those desired things, which is wealth, and now he's going to explain what is the proper use of wealth. When one acquires wealth, how does one use that wealth properly and wisely? So first, elaborating how one acquires wealth, he says that one acquires the wealth, for that wealth to be righteous, it is to be obtained by energetic striving. It's kind of picturesque imagery here, amassed by the strength of one's arms, earned by the sweat of one's brow, righteous wealth, righteously gained. So the image that comes to mind here, and I don't think this really applies to Anathapindika, but this would be a land owning, maybe a small scale farmer, a farmer who has maybe a small plot of land, relatively small, on which he grows the crops that are to be used to to provide the food for the family, and with the excess to sell on the market. So we could see this would be a plowsman working the plow to plow the field, relying on the strength of his arms to drive that plow across the field, and the plow is being directed by a pair of oxen. And as he's plowing the field under the hot Indian sun, his brow is giving off sweat. So that seems to be the picture conveyed by this description. Anathapindika is a businessman, even a small-scale banker. So he's still earning his wealth righteously, but he doesn't have to rely upon strong arms and a sweat pouring down from the brow, but he's probably sitting in his office, lending money and receiving payments back from those who have borrowed the money. But it's righteous wealth, righteously gained. So we could think not only of the manual laborer today, but of a white collar worker, any kind of livelihood in which one is earning one's living by honest means, not cheating others, or not by a kind of livelihood that imposes harm and suffering on others. Okay, so one earns this wealth righteously, and then with that wealth righteously gained, the first proper use is to make oneself happy and pleased. And then one makes everyone in one's household happy and pleased. So one's parents, wife and children, And the next might be a little bit startling for our way of thinking today. But one makes one's slaves, workers, and servants happy and pleased. So sometimes people ask, I've heard the question or objection, why didn't the Buddha, why is he speaking about slaves? Why didn't he come out and call for the abolition of slavery? I think we have to remember the Buddha is speaking now against the background of India in the 5th century BC, where slavery was probably a fairly widespread practice. So the Buddha doesn't see his role as being that of an abolitionist and saying, coming out and saying we should abolish slavery, just as he didn't come out and say abolish the caste system. In India, there was a caste system, at least the broad outlines of the caste system, with society organized into the 4 broad social groups of the Kshatriyas. That would be the administrative class, the governing class, the warrior class, the Brahmins, the priests who perform the religious rituals, the Vaishyas, these would be the landowners, businessmen, agriculturalists, and then the Shudras, the manual laborers. So the Buddha didn't come out and say, let's abolish the caste system, and instead try to institute a classless society. What the Buddha said is that social class is not divinely ordained, and that one's position within the caste system doesn't determine one's moral and spiritual wealth. That depends upon one's character and one's actions. And similarly, the Buddha doesn't come out and say, let's abolish slavery. But what he says is that the householder who has slaves, as well as workers and servants, should treat them properly with kindness, with compassion, and provide for their happiness. And in fact, in the Buddha's time, probably there was not that much difference between unpaid slaves and workers and servants who were working partly voluntarily and receiving some kind of salary. In fact, probably slaves were also given some payment so that they could provide for their own needs and the needs of their family. In any case, the householder, and the householder that's depicted here would be a person of some wealth, maybe not necessarily extremely wealthy, but having enough wealth to have a household staff, including slaves, workers, and servants. And the householder sees that they live, that all of their material needs are looked after, their health needs, they're provided with proper healthy and nutritious food, as well as clothing, medical assistance in time of illness, and then that they're given vacations. And so he maintains them in happiness. Okay, so putting this all together, so this is the first proper use of wealth, to look after everyone in one's household, oneself, family, and the household staff, and see that they're all kept well, healthy, and safe. Okay, the second proper use of wealth, maybe we could put this under the heading of, in contemporary terms, would be paying one's insurance. Different kinds of insurance, property insurance, home insurance, health insurance. And so this is making provisions against the loss that might occur from fire, floods, kings appropriating one's property, thieves, and displeasing heirs. So making oneself secure against them. Okay, then the third proper use of wealth, maybe in contemporary terms. Actually, this would cover a number of items in contemporary terms. First, it said one makes the 5 oblations. These are the 5 kinds of gifts. So the 5 oblations, the recipients of the gifts are relatives. And so one would provide some gifts, some financial assistance to relatives, particularly if they find themselves in financial straits. One will help them out, help out the poor cousin, poor nephews and nieces, provide them with some financial assistance to help set them up in business and so on. Then guests, and in India, it was very important, treating guests properly is one of the primary obligations. It said that after the deities, the next type of person, the person next in importance is the guest. So when one has visitors, one should be able to provide meals to them, snacks, provide a room for them to stay. If they come from a distant part of India, they might be staying a few days or a week, so one has to really look after them properly. Then one should be making some offerings to the ancestors. So this is just like in Chinese culture, in Indian culture, making offerings to the departed ancestors is considered important. So one will have it probably in the home, one has a shrine. And of course, in those days, one wouldn't have photographs of the ancestors, but one might have little plaques with the names of the ancestors, one's deceased parents, grandparents, maybe going back even several generations earlier. And then one will make regular little offerings of candles, flowers, and fruits to the ancestors. And then the king was always a dreaded presence in ancient India. And the king would impose taxes. And so one would have to pay taxes to the king. And then to the deities, you see, the Buddha doesn't reject the worship of the deities, but the deities are regarded as beings of a maybe higher stature than human beings, and they have some influence over human life. And so one would make offerings to the deities. In fact, even in most Buddhist temples in Sri Lanka, the main center of worship is the Buddha hall, the Buddhuge, where they would have the image of the Buddha as the center, with flanking the Buddha would be statues of Sariputta and Moggallana. And then sometimes in the background, there'll be a painting showing many, many large company of monks, bhikkhunis, lay people surrounding the central Buddha image. Then off to the side, there'll be paintings of the Buddha's past life as illustrated in the Jataka stories, particularly those past lives in which he perfected each of the 10 paramitas. So that is the main place of worship in the temple. But off to the side, there will be they call it the Devale, that is the place for worshiping of the deities. And there'll be little images of the main deities worshipped in Sri Lanka, with his Vishnu, the god Pattakamma, Saman, who I suspect is a transformation of the Bodhisattva Samanta Bhadra, Nata, Lokanatha, who is a transformation of Avalokiteshvara or Kuan Yin, and Patini, a female deity, who is in a way the counterpart of the Chinese female Kuan Yin. And so one will make offerings to the deities, because the deities, it's believed in ancient India and even in Buddhist countries today, have some kind of impact on the mundane concerns of everyday life. So the deities are sort of invisible in the background, help one if one wants to get a good job, or if one wants one's children to get into a good college, or if one wants to succeed in business. The deities are there pulling the strings. And so to win their good favor, one will make regular offerings to them. So that is the third proper use of wealth. And then the fourth proper use of wealth is to make offerings to ascetics and Brahmins who refrain from intoxication and heedlessness, who are settled in patience and mildness, and who are taming themselves, calming themselves, and training themselves for nirvana. And what's interesting here, the Buddha, you can see, he's not saying that the householder should make the offerings only to the bhikkhus, the Buddhist bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, but as part of the Indian culture, he encourages the householders to support any ascetics, the samanas, and the Brahmins who have gone forth to lead lives of contemplation and renunciation, as long as they are dedicating their efforts to training the mind, to gaining this higher peace and realization of higher wisdom. It's part of the duty of the lay disciple to support them with gifts. And so that is the fourth proper use of wealth. It's that wealth that has gone to good use, that is properly employed and used for a worthy cause. And then the Buddha concludes, he says, when anyone exhausts their wealth on anything apart from these four worthy deeds, if one uses the wealth to buy alcohol, for drinking, to enjoy worldly pleasures, to go on extravagant vacations, on gambling, that is wealth that has gone to waste, that has been squandered and used frivolously. But if anyone exhausts their wealth on these four worthy deeds, that wealth is said to have gone to good use, to have been properly used, and to have been utilized for a worthy cause. Okay, then the verses pretty much just sum up the same point, the point of the sutta. And then it says that recollecting thus, a mortal remains firm in the noble Dhamma. They praise him here in this life, and after death, he rejoices in heaven. Okay, so that is sutta number 61. I think at this point we could look at some questions. Now I have to find my way back. And I think if you want to ask questions, you'll find the hand icon in the participant box. Okay, so let us begin. I take the questions in which the hands have come up. Young?
Yes.
Please, you have a question?
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question about how to cultivating generosity last week, but I got some answer today. And today's teaching about wealth, is it applicable to rich people like Anathapindika, or do you think it can be used for most of us who try to make ends meet?
I think, one has to try to let us say, to utilize one's income in a way, in a balanced way, so that one can meet one's own personal needs without squandering the wealth. Yeah, so the Buddha is speaking to Anathapindika, who is a fairly wealthy man, and probably he has in mind other householders who are people of, let's say, ample means. But for a person who is just struggling to make ends meet, they have to primarily use their wealth to, in the first way, that's mentioned here, to support to ensure that they make themselves and their immediate family happy and pleased. But also one should try to to utilize at least some portion of one's income for charitable purposes, even if one can only give a little bit. Because in this way, even if one is giving a little bit, one is developing the virtue of generosity. And it's the inner quality, the disposition to give that is important rather than the amount that one gives. There's a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. I believe it's in the first chapter, somewhere around in the 30s. I don't remember the exact number, where the Buddha says, even if one has a little bit, let me see if I could find that sutta quickly.
Okay.
Even if one has a little bit, one should give from what one has. I can't find it right off the bat. Maybe let's take another question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bhante.
Somewhere there, somewhere in that range. Okay, next question is from Leong.
Good morning, Bhante. In the Panya, there are 5 hindrances listed. One of them is doubt.
Yeah.
This doubt, how is it different from that under the Samyojana or the fetters?
I think it's the content of the doubt is probably the same. That would be doubt about the Buddha and his teaching about the Dhamma. But I'd say that in the case of the hindrances, one can overcome that doubt temporarily through maybe reflection on the teaching, examination of the teaching, or suppressing it through meditative practice. Whereas the fetter of doubt is what is the doubt when it's cut off entirely through direct realization of the truth of the teaching. So it's not so much the content that's different, but it is the degree of doubt.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the
Thank
way
you,
I would
Bhante.
understand. Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Samantha Jayatilaka.
Yes, morning, Bhante. Thank
Good
you for
morning.
taking my question. I just want to clarify the third advice Buddha gave regarding offerings to deities. I was just wondering how this does this mean like worshipping of gods, and because how this relates to Buddhism, because I thought Buddhism was more on the concept of causes and effect, that our actions are based on basically that, and then on the dependent origination. So to say, when he refers to like offerings to deities or gods, why did he say that?
Well, this would have been a typical Indian practice of the period, and the Buddha doesn't reject it, because also that the deities here within Buddhism are conceived not as being like the deities of Hinduism, eternal divine beings, but these would be beings who had previously been human beings and are now been reborn in the Deva world. And yet, though they're living in the Deva world, but they still have some influence on human beings, and so on human life. And so making offerings to the deities, I guess, is a way of winning their favor so they could intercede favorably on behalf of human beings.
Right.
And this is a common belief in the
Did Buddha actually, was that Buddha's belief as well, or was that the sort of belief?
I don't know. I think he could have just been conforming to the common belief of the period.
Lovely. Thank you.
So there is a passage in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta in which the Buddha, he's speaking to two Brahmins who have made an offering to him. He says that the good person, having done meritorious deeds, should share the merit with the deities. And when they share the merit with the deities, then the deities have compassion for him and will protect him just as a mother protects her only child. And so for the Buddha, what's important is probably not making material offerings to the images of the deities, but rather sharing one's merit with the deities.
Part of generosity. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you.
I found that sutta, by the way, that I was referring to before. It's
thank you.
Yeah, it's in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 1, sutta number 33, where the Buddha says, some provide from what little they have, others who are rich don't like to give. An offering given from what little one has is worth 1,000 times its value. So even if we have a little, if one doesn't have much, but if one can give something from that, then it still has great value. Okay, let's go on.
Right, that would be like part of generosity, expanding generosity. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Pradeep.
Namaste, Bhante. Is giving gifts to friends and relatives considered as generosity?
Yeah, it will be a practice of generosity.
Okay.
That was the question?
Yes, yes.
Okay, Catherine Gao. Catherine? Okay, we'll go on to Marcel.
Thank you, Bhante. I want to quickly clarify on the passage in the part of the having faith in the enlightenment of the Tathagata.
Yeah.
There is one word that says fortunate. To what Pali word does the word fortunate?
The word is sugata, which literally it means well gone, which doesn't make good sense in English.
Understood.
So the way it's explained in the commentaries, they say that he's sugata because he's gone well to the final goal, which is nibbana, and he's gone well along the good path, which is the Noble Eightfold Path.
Okay,
so that is the way it's explained. Okay, did Catherine, could she come
Yeah,
on? Okay, please.
Thank you, Bhante. I forgot to unmute myself. My question is, where does fame come from? I missed this part in your early teach.
What does what come from?
Fame, like wealthy come from generosity, long lifespan come
Oh, I
from
see.
saving lives.
Yeah. What I said is that it comes from praising those who are worthy of praise.
Thank you.
Okay, Brenda.
Yes, Bhante, thank you for these teachings. I wanted to ask you about your comments on slavery. My recollection is that right livelihood does not include the selling of human beings. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's actually true. That's actually true. And the way that's interpreted is dealing in slaves is considered a wrong form of livelihood.
So that would include buying them as well. Is that not right?
No.
No?
It seems that it's selling the slaves that's considered the wrong form of livelihood.
I see. And the caste system, the Buddha was clear that that would not obtain within the ordained Sangha. Is that not correct?
Yeah, the Buddha within the ordained Sangha, he says that when one goes forth into the monastic life, then one gives up one's class or caste status, and one becomes known simply as a follower of the Sakyaputta, of the son of the Sakyan, a follower of the Buddha. So within the monastic order, the Buddha abolished caste distinctions. So does that address the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much for these teachings.
Okay. Okay, the next is Ron.
Hello, Bhante.
Hello.
Bhante, I have a question. You talked about wealth and you said you shouldn't spend it on extravagant vacations and worldly goods. What are considered worldly goods?
Well, maybe I should backtrack on that. I wouldn't say that you shouldn't go on vacations. And of course, when you go on a vacation, you have to spend the wealth. Maybe what I would say is that one shouldn't like squander on extravagant vacations beyond one's means, but naturally, one wants to take a break from one's ordinary life routine. And so going on a vacation within one's means would be quite acceptable, I would say. And worldly goods would be, of course, one needs worldly goods in order to live a happy, contented life. But maybe spending beyond one's means for things that are just, you know, like decorative items to, maybe some of you people have better ideas than I do. As a monk, I don't have such clear ideas of what extravagant expenditures would be.
Maybe getting an 80-inch screen TV when a 60-inch screen TV is okay?
I guess so.
Going overboard.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Dayani?
Yes, Bhante, thank you for taking my questions. So this is regarding offering to deities, Bhante. How can we ensure that our action of offering to deities not fall into rituals?
I would say, you know, in contemporary society, probably we don't really have to consider very much making offerings to deities. But the Buddha was teaching against the background of the ancient Indian society in which people did make the offerings to the deities. And so that was good. And there would, like, each village would have its protective deities. Probably the families would have their own protective deities. And so the Buddha didn't want to abolish these traditional practices and completely discard them. And so he would include this as part of the ways in which the householder should spend their wealth. But if within your household you're not accustomed to making offerings to deities, then I'm not saying that you should start that practice, But if you do, if it is a part of family custom, then probably like burning sticks of incense, offering some flowers and fruits would be acceptable practices.
Because it is still widely practiced today's Bhante, like, you know, people create deities out of stone or out of some features. We do not know what's the background of the deities themselves. Like just now Bhante said that the deities was a human before and now being born in Deva world.
Yeah.
And they like offering fires, neem leaf, and all the stuff Bhante. So that is like a rituals, right? Which is not allowed to do for those who want to be a stream enterer.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure that that is covered by what's called Silabbata Paramasa. But this is it might take too much time to go into that now. I have to take some of the other questions.
Okay, Bhante, thank you very much.
There are too many questions I see that I could. Let's take Joe A. Is that Allison? Oh, I didn't take Lim Kim Hung.
Yeah, Bhante, thank you for your teaching.
Yeah.
You know, on the second wishes of the householder, where we mentioned, may fame come to me,
yeah,
relative and preceptors. Is it relating to those monks ordained preceptors? When you talk of preceptors?
It seems a little odd in that particular passage, because usually the word upajaya is used in a monastic context to refer to the preceptor of a monk, but probably it would refer to maybe the teachers, whether it would be monastic teachers or even teachers of secular skills and arts and crafts.
Yes, because this sutta is directed to householder.
Yeah. I had a note on that. Let me see if I could find the original file. Yeah, the commentary explains the word upajaya as if it means friends, but I don't find that explanation very convincing. I would say probably it could refer both to monastic teachers as well as maybe teachers of secular worldly skills.
Yeah, I think that's more appropriate.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joe A.
Yes.
Oh, that's Allison. Yeah.
Yes. I just want to follow up the question, the statement you made previously. You answered Brenda Welsh. I just want to make sure you said the householder in back to 5th century Indians can buy slaves but cannot sell slaves.
You know, I don't really know the background so well to this. It's just that slaves are mentioned as part of the household within the sutta. How the householder requires the slave, I don't know.
Okay, so in a sense, so the sutra, did the sutra mention about they can buy the slave but not selling slaves? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, the sutta doesn't say anything about how one acquires the slaves. It just speaks about the slave as being part of the household. Dasa and dasi are the words that are used.
And then the following question I have, does that mean enabling?
Say again?
Does that mean enabling the system, allowing the system exist?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into these discussions.
Okay.
It's just part of the social system of the Buddha's time.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Okay, Alvina?
So Bhante, my thinking was that basically first we have to have the right livelihood, right? A right means of making money, and then, or wealth. And then it's only the disposable income, which, you know, one should probably put to entertaining guests and hospitality and, you know, things like that, right? So charity would come before the disposable income. It would be, you know, part of, according to Buddha, it should be part of your regular expenses. How much ever you make, you should put a little towards charity.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Thanks, Bhante.
Okay, then I'll just have time for one more question. That's Vinyu.
Good morning, Bhante. I have two questions, sorry.
You have to ask only one.
Okay. During Buddha's time, there was well, most people actually address Buddha as Bhagava.
Yeah.
So they address Buddha as Bhagava rather than Buddha, right?
Well, usually when they address him, they would use the word Bhante.
Okay, right.
Sometimes Bhagava, but Bhagava is more like a formal title. But for direct address, like when the monks are speaking to the Buddha, they'll call him Bhante.
What about like the person that addressed Buddha, say during Buddha's time at Kapilavastu? Would they address him as Bhagava?
Who?
A peasant, a farmer, in a teenage boy, say, address Buddha at Kapilavastu.
Yeah.
Will he actually address Buddha as Bhagava?
I think they would always address him as Bhante.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's all. Right, thank you.
Okay, then we're going to have to end now. So we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Let me get that. Okay, so we're going to share the merits now with the Devas. So we'll be practicing one of the ways of, well, this isn't using wealth, but this is sharing the wealth of our merits with the Devas, the Nagas, and other beings. Okay, so we direct our minds to the Devas and the Nagas, and we recite Akasa ta Jabuma ta Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanang Akasa ta Jabuma ta Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanang Akasa ta Jabuma ta Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Parang Etavatacham Heti Sampadam Punya Sabbe Deva Modantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhuta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Sattva Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Pavagupadaya Vichihetato Etantare Satakayu Papanna Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting.
Sadhu,
Sadhu,
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Bante, good health to you.
Long
Thank you.
life. Thank you,
Okay.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante. Thank you, Bante.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Tutiyatu.
Good week, everyone.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay. Please look at the BAUS website for other events and activities, including we have the meditation tomorrow evening, Wednesday evening. Tomorrow morning, we have the Kuan Yin Enlightenment ceremony from 10 to 11:30. Okay, so I will have to go up now. So thank you all.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Tutiyatu Bante.
Thank you, Bante.